Can we agree that violence and bullying are just part of growing up? And if not, why? And the second question that you both will address is how do violence and bullying affect children and adolescents, and why does gender matter? And our first speaker will be Nicola. So Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Hope. Okay, thanks very much. And what I'm hoping to do is to open this discussion, and thanks very much for inviting me to do so, with a look at the big picture about violence and bullying. So, of course, the answer to the first question must be no. Violence and bullying should not be just part of growing up, but I think that the risks are very high. So, what I'm hoping to do with this first slide is to put school into context. And a few years ago, I was introduced to the concept in the UK of contextual safeguarding. And I think it's useful to refer to that here when considering violence and bullying, because it does show school in its proper context. So, issues of safeguarding and child protection have concentrated on things that happen to the child in the home. And it does seem to be that that transition from primary to secondary education is a time when parents are less aware of what happens to them beyond the door of the home. And you can see that next layer of the social circle is the peer group, which is really attractive and influential. So there's a tendency towards doing things that might make people fit in, which could go as far as group offending. It could be shoplifting or daring each other to do things that wouldn't happen if young people were not part of a group and people want to be in a group. And then we get to the point in the next layer where we've got a lot of peer groups, different little groups there that are concentrated in one school environment. And in that school environment, we might see bullying and other negative behaviours happen. And we can't divorce all of this from the impact of the neighbourhood. Schools are hubs within neighbourhoods and communities. Indeed, some schools may even have rivalries between each other. And in somewhere like the UK, where you've got school uniforms, that can be very obvious to see. So school is one part of a wider system, and violence and bullying could be experienced in any part of it. So our remit today is to look at schools which have a lot of potential to be protective and to mitigate against other areas of violence and bullying. Recently, we had the pleasure in the UNESCO chair of working with our colleagues in UNESCO and UNICEF and WHO to put a session together for the Global Forum for Adolescents. And it was about promoting well-being in schools. And when we were designing the session, one of our young leaders said to us, well, one way you can think about schools and conceptualize them is as built environments, thinking about the physical spaces in schools, and then about the processes of learning that go on within schools. And actually, I thought in this context of bullying, it might be worth looking at them in that way. So if we think about the built environment of schools, you can think of hotspots in schools, perhaps. So it might be a narrow corridor. It might be a dark stairwell. It could often be changing rooms and toilets, where if something is not well supervised, it could be seen as an opportunity for bullying to take place and other forms of violence. And then the route to school, what does a young person have to navigate between leaving the front door of their own home and the school gate? Do they have to cross areas in that time where they might see intimidating peers? Is that somewhere where bullying might take place or violence? And then there are places close to schools. So it might be popular food vendors nearby, or a park, or even friends' homes. So it's thinking about these physical spaces where things can happen to children and young people. But then within the schools, these processes of learning, and it starts with school leadership and culture. What are the policies in schools that relate to bullying and violence? Is it seen as part of growing up by the leadership in the school, or is it more of a zero tolerance approach? So, thinking about what happens in the classroom, do teachers have a bullying style of teaching? Do people get humiliated when they're in the classroom? And does that kind of filter out into group activities? Or can we, improve that situation? Are people being desensitized to a problem that might seem to be entrenched and might seem to be very difficult to change? The processes of learning centre on the curriculum. So books and literature be used to talk about experiences of violence and bullying that other youth or children might have had? And do the processes in the classroom instill learning and respect for each other, and indeed about the valuing of diversity as that might relate to disability or race, culture, gender, sexual orientation? So we need to be thinking about safe spaces, both physically and within learning processes for young people at school. So the second question is, how does bullying and violence affect physical and mental health, and why does gender matter? So the impact on well-being, well, in terms of physical health, if you are being bullied, you might actually have bodily injuries. And it could be that part of the reason for the bullying or violence comes from the fact that somebody has a condition that they need to manage at school. Perhaps they have an inhaler, or perhaps they're injecting insulin at school. And if, these things are picked up on and taunted, and people make fun of those things, then perhaps there's going to be poor management of these non-communicable diseases like diabetes or asthma, that can have a physical impact. Then if we move to mental health, the impact of bullying can be feeling lonely, could be suicidal, being isolated. And there is also research to suggest, and we have many great resources on our webpage that you can refer to after the webinar, showing things about, for example, increased substance use among young people who are bullied. And then what about the educational prospect? Because if for one reason or another you don't want to be at school, or you have to skip lessons, then your educational prospects might be damaged. You might be reluctant to attend, and your performance might be affected. And we know that there is a mutuality, a mutual benefit to health and education. Students who are healthy are ready to learn, and students who learn well and get great educational outcomes have positive outcomes later in life around their health. So it's really important that people attend. And then what about the impact of gender? Well, the type of bullying that happens can differ by gender. So male gender might be linked with physical bullying, female gender with psychological bullying. Gender has an impact on risk. All people are at risk of gender-based violence, but those who are perceived to not to conform to the norms of a binary notion of gender or sexuality, they may be at increased risk of bullying. And indeed, many types of otherness exist, and the challenge for us is to make sure that that diversity is valued. So here are some reflections for today. Really looking forward to other speakers and the discussion we're going to have. So how do we find safe space where nothing is private? How do we understand the context within schools and beyond the gates? How do we fight that desensitization and trivialization of bullying? How do we promote belonging, think about good role modeling, and make it everybody's responsibility in the school community to take this challenge on? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for your contribution. And now we'll continue with Frida.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Nicola, for a great start to these very hard and complex questions. Can we agree that violence and bullying are just part of growing up? I think most of us who attending this webinar already have agreed on a no on that question. I just wanted to bring out one part from the comment from the Committee of the Rights of the Child regarding the Article 19 and the right of the child to freedom from all forms of violence, where it's clearly stated that no violence against children is justifiable, and also all violence against children is preventable. And I wanted to bring this up also to share some hope, because I think this is a very hopeful statement, because of course sometimes when you look around you and you listen to children and what they experience in their everyday lives, you can feel that we have a long way to go, which we do, but it is also possible to prevent the violence that occurs, and bullying is a type of violence. And I wanted to say a little bit more about the effects on bullying. what it can do to children. Like Nicola also started to say, it has severe effects on various parts of their life. And bullying is now a very well researched part of children's lives. It has grown exponentially since the 70s, the amounts of published research articles on bullying. One of the things that are mostly researched are the effects of bullying. What does it actually do? And also what are the connections between bullying and various negative consequences. So there is so much research that you can almost say that it's a causality between bullying and anxiety, poor health, depression, suicidal thoughts, and attempts and self-harm. There's research states that more than a quarter of the depression among 18-year-olds are caused by bullying. And also the depression, it increases with the dose. The more bullying, the more depression. And suicide attempts is 4 times more common among children that are frequently exposed to bullying. And one Australian study shows that anxiety and depression due to bullying during childhood constitutes 8 and 10% of the problems in total, respectively, in that country. So we can see that it has a severe consequences on mental health, but also, of course, on education. There's a Swedish study shows that there's a 1.75 times higher risk of failing grades. You can have very low educational achievements. Bullying is the biggest risk for school absence among boys compared to all other forms of violence against children. That's also gender issues, that the effects can vary depending on who you are. So for boys, it's the most serious type of violence when it comes to the risk of dropping out of school. And it's also, in some studies have shown that it's the most common reason for dropping out of high school among young people who are neither working nor studying. And these effects of bullying is not only, I mean, like I mentioned before, it depends on also the dose of bullying, which also is a good thing to remember when it comes to prevention, that if we catch it early, if we do something in the beginning, we have a better chance of also buffering or helping these children not to gain severe consequences. And you don't need to look at the numbers on this picture. You only see that it is increasing. This is a Swedish study, but with over 3,000 children, where you see that if the more you are subjected to bullying, the more mental health problems you get. So it's very clear that if we do something early, and if we prevent or act early on, we can prevent a lot of mental health problems among children. And it's not only when they are children, it continues into adulthood. The mental health problems, there are greater risk of depression, suicide attempts, and suicide, especially among those frequently exposed. And it has more serious consequences for mental health as an adult than neglect during childhood. If you compare, if you've been subjected to neglect in the family, or if you've been bullied, you have more serious consequences for mental health. And there's a big study looking at 50-year-olds that have been bullied. They have lower income more often. They are unemployed. They have less money saved compared to their non-exposed peers. So that is just a summary on why we all can agree on the answer no, on if this is something that is just a normal part of childhood and something that we can agree that we can just brush off. We cannot do that. And what has gender to do with it? Well, it is a gendered experience. As Nicola mentioned, there can be difference in the type of bullying that girls and boys are subjected to. The verbal and physical bullying is more common among boys, and the psychological or relational bullying is more common among girls. But another thing is that boys are most often, not always, subjected by other boys, and girls are subjected by girls and boys, which means that girls are sometimes more like subjected double up. a double vulnerability. But what I really want to point out when it comes to the school environment is that school staff are much more likely to see the verbal and physical bullying and to act on it, and they're less likely to see the relational bullying or the psychological bullying, which is of course not. It is totally natural. If you see someone pushing or shoving or saying mean words, it's easier as an adult to see that, to be aware of that, than when it comes to the more slim forms of like psychological or relational bullying. Oh, sorry, wrong way. And it's also been shown, and that's also something that the students that we meet in our organization, that they say that adults place higher demands on girls' social ability. We expect girls to be more social. We expect them to take care of their relationships. We expect them to be to have higher better skills when it comes to their social abilities, and they're also expected to resolve more conflicts on their own. So an advice that we get from students, and something that we can, I think, school staff can be better at, is to take a close look on social interactions. And I'm a teacher myself from the beginning. It's not an easy task to do that, but you can study relationships closer and see that someone is a part of a group. It appears that someone is a part of a group, but she or he can still be left out. You are not included on equal terms. Your membership in that group is conditional. So there's can be very the power balances within these groups can also be the grounds for bullying or ostracism, to be left out. And it's also common that adults reinterpret bullying as conflicts and let the students solve the conflicts on their own. And this is more often for girls, because what I said recently about the type of the bullying that they are subjected to. So one advice would be to not leave students alone with that, but to actually give them the support and help from adults to resolve the situation that they need. Because we are, as adults, school staff as adults we have more experiences when it comes to social interactions, so we can help them and be closer and take a closer look to that. And that's also one of the things that need to be included in the monitoring of bullying, to talk to students, to ask them what they are really experience in their everyday life. Another aspect that I want to bring up is the gender policing. Like Nicola said, that students that are not non-conforming to gender norms or non-binary, and also all students that are not within the norms of the binary gender systems are also, of course, more subjected to bullying. But it's also a ground for bullying in general. And this is apart from a research article, that students' speech, behavior, and dress are regulated by cultural rules related to the right way to exist in the school environment. And youth's everyday gender policing practices often fail to draw adults' attentions, because these behaviors largely align with the institutional values of school. Young people's attitude about difference are partially formed in a school-based social sense that rewards conformity. So we also need to take a look at ourselves and the school climate and the school environment to come to terms with the gender policing. Because in an environment where there are very few ways to be correct, if there are very set norms and the ways you are supposed to be normal, to be correct, then the need to find someone who's more wrong than yourself arises, and that can lead to victimization of various kinds. So we can either categorize some students as different and try to get others to tolerate them, but that doesn't change the power balance. The power balance is still there. We categorize someone as different, or we can look at what characterizes them as different and work to change that attitude, to actually changing the norms instead of just tolerating those who are categorized as different. So there's just a few notes that I would like to contribute with today. Thank you.